He was cuffed in the rain like a common criminal because they thought he was just an old man with something to hide. Officer Reyes saw Lawrence Avery, a quiet 78-year-old veteran, and assumed guilt wrapped in silence. He saw a rusted truck, a locked metal case, and a man who didn't speak unless asked, and mistook dignity for deception. But when they picked Lawrence Avery, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know he was a Cold War intelligence operative, a guardian of secrets too dangerous for the wrong hands, and too sacred to be forgotten. What came next wasn't just justice. It was a reckoning delivered not with rage, but with a quiet promise finally kept. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe. Because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Rain slicked the empty pavement outside the small-town station as the clock ticked louder than it should have. Inside, the steel case sat untouched, and the air grew heavy with questions no one was brave enough to ask. And still, Lawrence waited, calm, composed, and ready. They thought he was just another old man behind the wheel on a rainy night, just another cautionary tale waiting to happen. But Lawrence Avery wasn't lost, drunk, or confused. He was on a mission. The streets of Larkspur, a sleepy town draped in fog and routine, hadn't seen anything truly unexpected in years. That night, as rain tapped against the windows like a soft warning, the local police had set up a routine DUI checkpoint at the edge of town. It was supposed to be uneventful. Just a few glances at licenses, a few polite nods. Then came the creaking hum of a weathered Chevrolet pickup, paint chipped and headlights dim. Inside sat Lawrence, 78, face still and focused, a locked steel case buckled into the passenger seat beside him like it was made of gold. The officer who approached his window was young, polite, but curious. Lawrence handed over his ID without a word. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from age, and something else, a deeper weight. When asked about the case, Lawrence simply said, "It's not for you, it's for them." That one sentence turned a routine stop into a silent standoff. The officer pressed. Lawrence didn't budge. Not with defiance, but with purpose. Something about the calm in his voice unsettled them, and when backup arrived, they did what the protocol told them to do. They cuffed him, searched the truck, and locked the metal case in the back of a cruiser. Lawrence didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice or argue. He just stood in the rain, still as the trees behind him, watching them take what he'd guarded for decades. Who was this man? Why did his silence feel heavier than words? There's a kind of fear that comes not from shouting, but from knowing. And in that moment, Lawrence Avery knew something they didn't. He had been waiting for this night. And while they saw an old man in a rusted truck, he saw the end of a promise beginning to unfold. Have you ever looked at someone and realized, far too late, that they were never who you thought they were? At the station, the rain still clung to Lawrence Avery's shoulders like a second skin, cold and unforgiving, but he didn't flinch. The officers led him inside, hands cuffed gently behind his back, movements respectful but firm. Still treating him like a man who might have hidden something dangerous. No one quite knew what to make of him. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then his replies were brief, deliberate, and strangely composed. They fingerprinted him, took his mugshot, logged his belongings. When they pulled out the steel case to tag it as evidence, one officer half-joked that it probably contained old war medals or dusty love letters. No one laughed. There was something about the silence that followed. It felt too heavy, too measured. Lawrence didn't ask about the case. He just watched, calm and still, as if this was all part of something far bigger than anyone could see. It was placed in a small holding cell, no windows, just a bench and a flickering camera in the corner. The door closed with a soft clank. Minutes passed, then more. One of the younger officers scrolling through the database after running Lawrence's ID froze mid-screen. A strange alert had flashed, gone in a blink but too specific to ignore. It didn't say wanted or missing. It said, "Secure individual, do not question. Await federal response." The officer hesitated, unsure if it was a system glitch or something more. He called the sergeant over. When the message repeated, only this time through a completely different interface, they both stood staring at the screen in silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach twist. What had they just walked into? Who exactly was sitting in that cell down the hall? The room, once filled with idle chatter and the smell of burnt coffee, now felt like a vault, sealed, tense, breathless. No one spoke loudly. No one joked. Even those who hadn't seen Lawrence directly began to feel the weight of his presence like a shadow stretching across the station. Can you imagine arresting someone, only to learn you might have just placed cuffs on a man holding secrets your badge could never comprehend? The station clock ticked louder than usual, each second stretching into something uncertain. Lawrence Avery remained still in the holding cell, back straight, eyes forward, the kind of posture that didn't come from habit but from discipline, military perhaps. Meanwhile, outside the confined room, the air had shifted. What began as routine had curdled into tension. Officers moved slower, spoke in hushed tones, and glanced toward the evidence room more often than they should have. The case, still locked and unmarked, had been placed on a separate shelf, now under silent orders to be untouched. Then came the call, short, coded, heavy. A female dispatcher picked up, nodded silently, and handed the phone to Sergeant Holloway with eyes wide and unsure. The moment he pressed it to his ear, the station stopped breathing. After listening, he lowered the receiver like it weighed 1,000 pounds and simply said, "Federal agents are inbound, ETA 28 minutes. That was it. No explanation, just a countdown. A quiet panic settled over the room. One officer muttered under his breath, "What did we just do?" And no one answered. The dispatcher began watching the security cameras more closely, as if expecting a siege. Officer Reyes, the one who had first cuffed Lawrence, now stood by the front door, rigid, eyes fixed on the empty lot outside. What had once felt like control now felt like a mistake, one that couldn't be undone. Lawrence, meanwhile, blinked slowly inside the cell, unfazed. Every few minutes he closed his eyes as if he were somewhere else entirely. Did he know they were coming? Did he plan it this way? Those questions swirled unspoken, and still not a word passed his lips. Just stillness, just patience. Have you ever felt time stop? Not because the world paused, but because you realized you weren't the one holding the power anymore. The silence shattered, not with a siren, but with the low hum of 6 identical black SUVs gliding into the lot. Unmarked, unannounced, and unmistakably federal. The headlights cut through the mist like searchlights from another world, casting long shadows that curled around the station's walls. Officer Reyes didn't move. Inside, everyone had already fallen quiet, eyes locked on the monitors as the vehicles parked in perfect formation. Doors opened in unison. Dark-suited agents stepped out, their movements synchronized, purposeful. No wasted gestures, no hesitation. Among them was a woman, mid-40s, sharp gaze, badge in hand, who moved like someone used to walking into rooms that weren't hers and taking command anyway. "Agent Dana Clark," she announced, handing over credentials before asking calmly but firmly, "Where is the man and where's the case?" No pleasantries, no doubt. Sergeant Holloway led her down the hallway. The officers stood aside like furniture, invisible but watching, each step echoing across tile floors that now felt too loud. When Agent Clark reached the cell, she didn't knock or wait. She simply looked at Lawrence Avery through the small glass window, then asked for the door to be opened. Lawrence stood before anyone could say a word, eyes steady, as if greeting an old colleague rather than a stranger. She stepped in alone. The door closed. The words exchanged inside were brief. No one else heard them. But when she emerged, her orders were simple. Release him, immediately. He is not under arrest. He is under protection. A ripple went through the room like static. No protests, no resistance. Just the swift unraveling of every assumption made that night. Lawrence was led to a private room, handed a towel and a hot cup of coffee, which he finally accepted. Can you feel that moment? when the truth walks in and everything you thought you knew suddenly feels too small to hold it. In the evidence room, under Agent Clark's close supervision, the steel case was retrieved with the kind of care reserved for relics, not arrest property. She wore gloves, scanned the lock with a handheld device, and opened it slowly, like peeling back history. Inside, time had been carefully folded. Faded files stamped with redacted stamps, sealed manila envelopes, a flash drive cushioned in protective foam, and, at the very bottom, a sleek, flat black device marked only by a worn serial number. Clark's eyes narrowed as she studied it. Then came the whisper to her colleague, who stepped out to make a secure call. When the sergeant asked what they were looking at, Clark offered only what she was cleared to say. It was connected to something called Project Ember Watch, a Cold War-era joint intelligence operation so classified that even most federal agents had never heard of it. Lawrence, she explained, had been part of a covert unit tasked with protecting information too dangerous to disappear and too explosive to reveal before its time. The case was never meant to be opened by anyone but the proper federal authority, and that time, after decades of silence, had finally come. But what turned the room cold wasn't just the contents, it was the meaning. These weren't files, they were promises. One of them, Clark revealed, had been made by Lawrence himself to a dying comrade, to protect the truth, to keep it safe, and to deliver it when the signal came. And now, after years of watching the world move on, Lawrence had kept that promise. Through storms, through age, through the weight of knowing, what would you do if a friend asked you to carry a truth too big to share and too dangerous to ignore? For the rest of your life, Lawrence Avery didn't say much after that, and he didn't need to. The agents moved quietly around him, gathering documents, securing the device, sealing the case once more. But in the eyes of every officer who watched from the hallway, something had shifted. The man they had once seen as a fragile relic of a forgotten war now stood as a pillar of quiet resolve, a man who had carried more than secrets. He had carried a burden for a nation that had long forgotten his name. When Agent Clark requested a conference room, Sergeant Holloway led them to the back. There, in the soft hum of overhead lights, she laid out the truth. Lawrence had not just delivered evidence. He had delivered the final piece of a promise made long ago, one tied to the life of a man whose photo now sat in a small wooden box in Washington. That night, no medals were pinned, no cameras flashed, no one took a statement. But when Lawrence looked up and met the eyes of Officer Reyes, the young man who had first placed cuffs on his weathered wrists, something passed between them. Not regret, not apology, something deeper, a quiet recognition. As the agents filed out, escorting Lawrence with solemn respect, the station remained still. Outside, the rain had eased into a soft drizzle. The SUVs slipped away just as they had arrived, silent, smooth, disciplined. Inside, no one spoke for a long time. And later that week, when a government car arrived at Lawrence's home with a box containing a folded flag, a photograph, and a letter signed by a federal director, he received it without ceremony. Just a nod. Just closure. Would you recognize a hero if they passed you on the street? Or would you, like most of us, only see the quiet man carrying groceries and wonder why he walked a little straighter than the rest? Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who say the least. Lawrence Avery didn't seek attention, rewards, or recognition. He simply kept a promise, quietly for decades, because it was the right thing to do. In a world that often rewards noise and speed, his story reminds us that patience, integrity, and quiet courage still matter. We all carry something, memories, promises, regrets, or truths no one else may fully understand. And while others may overlook us, or assume we've grown too old to make a difference, our lives still hold meaning, strength, and purpose. Doing what's right doesn't always bring applause. Sometimes it only brings peace. And perhaps that's enough. So if you've ever felt like your time has passed or your voice doesn't carry like it used to, remember Lawrence. The promise he kept didn't change the world with noise. It changed it with silence, steadiness, and heart. What we do quietly, with dignity, may be the very thing that matters most in the end. Lawrence Avery never needed a crowd to witness his strength. His quiet return to the porch, coffee in hand, was its own kind of victory. A life reclaimed not through noise or anger, but through unwavering resolve. The rain had passed, but its memory lingered in the soft gleam of the morning light. And there he sat, not as a man forgotten, but as a man finally seen. In time, the station would carry on. The officers would write their reports, file the moment away. But something in them had shifted. They now knew that justice isn't always loud, and that history can live in the silence of a single man who simply refuses to let truth be buried. The files Lawrence delivered would go on to spark questions, reopen investigations, and breathe new life into stories long silenced. Some truths may wait quietly, but they are never truly gone. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.